The Power Factor Show with Rick, Steve, and Caleb. Episode 76.
You can find this podcast and others at Gun Rights Radio Network, gunrightsradio.com. Podcasting freedom.
Brought to you by Safariland and Hodgdon, the gunpowder people.
Welcome to the Power Factor Show. I'm Caleb.
Rick.
And today we are talking about IDPA Safety Officer training.
Yeah, we are.
And I think before we get into this episode, you know, it's kind of an interesting topic. I want to mention that right now IDPA has actually requested that clubs suspend safety officer training while we wait for the new rulebook to be finished. You know, if you're just coming in, the 30-second backstory is IDPA is really invested in creating a new rulebook. They've got a bunch of awesome dudes working on it, and that is a work in progress right now. Yeah. So to preserve continuity, they have requested that clubs stop safety officer training. So there may be a point in time when what we're about to talk about will be completely effing wrong.
Right. And I'm not going to go into a lot of details.
No,
I mean, the thing is once the new rule book comes out, if anybody goes into much detail on rules, it's going to all be out of date anyway.
Sure.
So, but I think the key thing in safety officer training is there are some people who are suited for it and some people who aren't.
Sure.
And I think if you're not suited for it, it's not like some kind of a black mark on your character or whatever. It's just that there are, in any endeavor, any type of club activities, whether it's shooting or curling or whatever, there's going to be the people who want to be heavily involved. They want to be the match officials. They want to be the club president. And then there's going to be the people who aren't.
Well,
you know.
And I think that part of that too is to be a safety officer requires the same sort of mindset and temperament that makes a good referee or a good umpire.
Yeah.
Because that is, I mean, really, you know, and to kind of get into that, Rick, what in you know, I don't even know if it's in there, but what in your mind is the primary role of a safety officer?
Well, the primary role is maintaining safety.
Right.
I mean, strangely enough, for someone called a safety officer.
It's crazy talk.
Yeah, but I mean, I liken the role of safety officer to be a combination of a lifeguard and a referee.
Yeah, I think that's a good description.
You know, you're there to make sure that the rules are being followed and that penalties as necessary are being distributed. But really what you're doing is keeping an eye on the guy who's got the gun in his hand or the gal who's got the gun in their hand and making sure that they and everybody else on the range is safe.
As safe as you can make them.
As safe as you can make them. I mean, obviously, if people are running around with loaded guns, it's funny. My girls were playing softball for a number of years, and I was sitting up in the stands with all the softball moms, and they were talking about how this was probably 4 summers ago, where in the span of a week, a little girl and a coach had been killed by batted balls.
Wow.
And you know, and I was remember
that's a really depressing story.
And I was talking to somebody about they regulate the weight of the bat in softball to make it less likely that the ball will be straight back up the middle. It's like it'll either be pulled or and the idea is it's safer to have the bat at this certain weight.
Having had some line drives come at my head,
I pitched in slow pitch for about 15 years.
So you've had some shots come right back.
I get hit more than once every year. But anyway, so the idea was these moms are gasping about these 2 people that had been killed playing softball, and I said, why don't the girls take up a safe sport like shooting? Yeah. You know, because I mean,
I've never heard of anyone get killed in a match.
I've heard of people killed at shooting ranges, you know, but I mean during a sanctioned, authorized, officiated match, I don't know that anybody's been killed.
You know. And to get back to what you said about some people are suited to be safety officers and range officers in USPSA, but that's another episode, and some aren't. I absolutely agree with that, and I also agree it's not a black mark. You know, one of the things that I believe as a certified safety officer that is a requirement for safety officers is a tremendous amount of patience. And I would actually, you know, if I did an honest assessment of myself, I am on the borderline of not being suited for a safety officer. I'm not really a patient person, just by my personality. I'm not super tolerant. So when people ask me dumb questions and it might not even be a dumb question. It may be a question that I feel like they should just know the answer to.
Right.
And a good safety officer is capable of running the brand new novice shooter through a stage with the same level of skill and expertise that would be applied to a distinguished master.
Sure.
And that guy is not me.
Right. Well, and the other thing too is not just your ability to adapt to the person's skill level, but you also have to have a certain what I call command presence.
Yeah, absolutely.
Where I've read more than once derogatory comments by higher class shooters saying how some marksman SO,
You've been on the IDPA forum.
Yeah, well, yeah, just the idea that because the SO is a marksman, they couldn't possibly understand how awesome this guy is as a shooter. And I just think it's one of those deals where you've got a certain level of training that you get as a safety officer, and there's super levels of training and awesome levels of training. Everybody gets the same level, and
they should have a classification system for safety officers.
Exactly.
I'm a GM safety officer, baby.
Yeah, and it's possible to be a lousy safety officer and be certified.
Sure.
But it's one of those deals where you've received training, and then what you do with it is kind of up to you. And so you've got to have a certain personality and a certain level of, you've got to read the rule book, for instance, and you've got to keep reading it.
Please read the rule book.
Yeah, and I think I
front to back.
That was my New Year's resolution, and I haven't started on it yet, but I will to read the rule book, and I will
again.
Yeah.
Well, and that actually gets into a really interesting conversation. Is what makes a good safety officer? And because I think everybody has a different opinion on that. And I've had guys tell me that I'm a good safety officer because I'm not super hardcore with things like calling cover. For me to earn a cover call from me, you've got I'm not looking at the guy who taught my safety officer class. Something he said that stuck with me was that my primary job is to make sure that he doesn't do anything with his gun that's going to do something dangerous.
Sure.
So as a safety officer, I am generally almost tunnel vision focused on his gun. So to earn a cover call from me, I'll be honest, you have to be egregiously violating cover. You're hanging way out, your foot's outside of cover, then I'll be like, really? Come on, dude.
Right.
Even from me, you're going to get that call. So I've had guys tell me that I'm a good safety officer because I'm not super strict with penalties. I've had guys tell me that I'm a terrible safety officer because I'm not super strict with penalties.
Yeah.
And I think the definition of a good safety officer depends on the shooter. For me, a good safety officer is someone who enforces the rules consistently, regardless of the shooter.
Yeah.
If there's one thing that will drive me batty, it's if I've been at sanctioned matches all over the country, and I've seen guys, safety officers, who will give calls out to an out-of-state shooter, but then their buddy, from the same old club comes up, and he's, doing all sorts of goofy crap, and he doesn't get any calls, and that just sends me right up the wall.
Yeah. There's got to be equity. Everybody's got to get the same experience. You can't. Now, I'll admit that when I've got a shooter who's never shot a match before,
right,
and I think it's counterproductive to be yelling cover.
Absolutely.
After the stage is done and their heart rate's back down below 120, I'll say, in the doorway there, your foot was hanging out.
Right.
Because I think screaming at them, they're thinking about,
they're already
is this tack sequence or is this
tack?
They've got more important things to think about. But I think you definitely have to be absolutely fair about if one guy's foot is hanging out, he gets the call, whether he's your buddy or whether he's that jerk from the club across the state or whatever
that we all hate.
Yeah, and there's plenty of those. Yeah, but and I think one of the things is, and this is something that I don't want to say we struggle with it, but something that we recognize is that no two people see things exactly the same way.
Sure.
And so at a club match, we'll have a safety officer assigned to each squad, and they rotate with the squad. And I know that at our club, there are certain shooters that when they're signing up for the squad sheet, they don't want to shoot on Bob's squad because Bob's a hard ass about cover or muzzle or whatever it is.
Frank's squad,
this easy guy that never calls anybody.
Because Frank's everyone's buddy. That's my squad, by the way.
And there's
not gonna lie.
There's always going to be an element of that. But I think you've got to have everybody has to have a similar understanding of how the rules are supposed to be enforced. And I think at our club, we're fortunate because most of the safety officer instructors in the Western Washington area are members of my club. And all of the safety officers that we've trained are trained by a group of people that are on the same page. And so if I were to go teach, let's say I taught the first safety officer class, I think that was taught up in Canada a couple of years ago, and now the guy who is the president of that club is now the area coordinator for all of Canada.
Right.
So when they call cover in Canada, they've got a little piece of me in them.
They call Washington cover.
Yeah, actually, they call Washington style cover in Canada.
So, and that's actually a funny comment because I have, seen many threads on various fora about Washington cover versus, we'll say, Virginia cover.
Sure.
And how they are two completely different concepts. While regardless of what the rule book says about cover, that's honestly been my experience when I moved up here from Indiana and I went to my first IDPA match in Washington. Dude called cover on me, and I was like, "Where?" And because and my foot was, and to be fair, my foot was out, and it was probably like that much of my foot. But where I had come from, they were much more of the spirit of cover, we'll call it.
And I think one of the reasons we're such hard asses about it is because our
California
club
made fun of you?
Well, no. I mean, when we founded our club, it was founded by 6 guys who had been USPSA range officers for a period of years and had many matches under their belts in terms of experience as shooters. And when we started to shoot IDPA, we absorbed and relished every little difference between the two sports. And so it's like in USPSA, you don't have to use cover.
Right.
In IDPA, you do have to use cover. And so if your foot is sticking out, we're going to ding you. There was nobody there standing over our shoulder. Well, 1 toe is okay, or 3 toes is okay. The rule book says no part of your lower body can be sticking out. So if you stick part of your lower body out, 3 seconds. And I frankly don't understand why anybody would enforce the rule any other way. If we were somebody, I saw a comment by somebody fairly high up in an organization that essentially said, don't take it so seriously. And I said, is this an international sport like the Olympics, or is this Bubba and Fred down at the gravel yard shooting tin cans? If we're an international sport where you're going to fly to a foreign country and expect to have the rules enforced the same way there as they are in Seattle or in Sacramento or in Schenectady, there's got to be that kind of consistency. Schenectady.
Well, and that's actually a really great segue.
I was trying to think of another city that started with S.
Yeah. That's actually a really great segue, which starts with S, into the value of a safety officer to a sanctioned match. Because for a shooter who is a safety officer but maybe isn't working a match, or even a shooter who's not a safety officer, the safety officers at a match a sanctioned match will absolutely make or break that match for that shooter. Because a safety officer can, regardless of how you shoot your performance, a safety officer can make or break your day. And a safety officer can be a jerk, or they can be great. And what has always been something that I feel like IDPA struggles with institutionally is what you just talked about, is having the rules enforced the same way, regardless of whether you're in Seattle or Sarasota. And I think that's that's one of the things that I believe they're working on addressing with the Tiger Team process, is getting that so it's done in a way that's definable and objective.
But I think also that the shooter is in a position to not put it in the SO's hands.
Agreed, yeah.
I mean, I've been shooting USPSA for 15 years, IDPA for over 10 years. I've never received a cover penalty.
Oh, God, really?
No.
I can't
count the number the rule book says don't put your foot out there, so I don't put it out there.
Right.
If somebody sticks their 2 toes out, they are going to get called for cover. Maybe not every time, but they're going to get called.
Eventually it's going to happen.
Yeah, so I just keep my foot in because the rule book says don't stick your foot out there. And just this discussion kind of goes to the idea that not everybody sees it exactly the same. And even given this set of guidelines, it's not just guidelines, it's a rule book. It says this is the way it's going to be, and it's not that way. And again, things are good. Things, where rule book is being revised and whatnot, but the human nature isn't going to change.
That's very true.
And so I think the people who want to pursue safety officer training, those are the people that should probably do it. But I also know that locally we have kind of a screening process where anybody who is interested in becoming a safety officer has to have an okay from the president of their local club. And that's just sort of to ensure that somebody, that somebody who we know and we trust their opinion has given this person the okay.
Sure.
And that's not, it wouldn't surprise me if that's not the case everywhere you go, but we just decided on the local level, we just thought people who are getting safety officer training have to have a certain level of skill and experience as a shooter in order to be able, I think, to enforce the rules intelligently.
Sure.
And so we like to see people, have a year of experience as a shooter before they take SO training, and then because we have our clubs in the area are fairly close geographically.
Boy, are they.
The SO instructors will be shooting with those people that they taught. And so it's kind of like an ongoing education program. I'll see somebody that was at a class that I taught 6 months earlier.
Continuing education.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that we talk about locally. We're like going, after you've been certified, there's no follow-up. There's no they don't, like in USPSA, every year you have to renew, take a test, and I think hopefully that's one of the things that they're talking about doing is kind of this ongoing, and the idea that you'll have continuing education. Like one of the things I like to do is just like on the show, we had a question, a rules question. I think it's a good idea if you have like a group of safety officers. If you've got we've got a local forum for our club, or we've got a separate forum for the safety officers, just throw a rules question out there after a match. Hey, this is what happened at the match. What would you have done? Or this is what I saw somebody do. Is that the right thing to do? And so there's a lot of help. We're still working as a group, even though everybody's kind of individually certified. But I think it's one of those things. It's not for everybody, but I think you're also not alone once you're into it. The safety officers, I think, are a little bit of a club. There's a Yahoo group for SO instructors and area coordinators and whatnot. So it's not like you're hung out to dry once you've got your sheepskin. That you're just alone in your endeavors or whatever as a safety officer. But it is something that when you're out there with the timer, you are absolutely in charge.
Yeah, you are.
And you can call the match director over to make a final determination, but the match director can't cover. A cover call that you made 15 minutes ago isn't going to be up for debate later. And so you're on the spot constantly. And it's not just, did I get the score right? Was his foot hanging out? Did he shoot in tack sequence? Yada, 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 yada. But is his finger on the trigger? Is his finger off the trigger? Is he breaking the 180 or the muzzle safe point? And yeah. And there's
no 180s in IDPA.
Yeah, and it's just there's a wealth of responsibility, and I got kind of a rise out of Steve when I referred to range officers as timer stands, because relative to the duties of an IDPA safety officer, really the other than safety, the range officer's primary duty is making sure the timer gets the last shot.
I don't know. I think scoring is pretty important.
Well, but that's after the stage is done.
All right.
While the clock is running. The range officer, mostly what I'm doing as a range officer is following the shooter around with the timer and make sure I get the last shot. With a safety officer, from the minute the timer goes off, you are looking for all of these little variations on engagement sequence and low cover, and is his knee hanging out, is his foot hanging out, is his elbow hanging out, is he shooting with the right hand, is this, that, and the other thing. And
the way you describe it sounds terrible.
Well, maybe, but it's just there are so many things that you are keeping an eye on, that you're watching, and it's not something that somebody who's not intimately familiar with the sport could be expected to do.
So kind of the next thing that we want to talk about is, we've talked about what makes a good safety officer, and the flip side of that is what kind of person makes not a good safety officer. And there's an old joke in politics in that anyone who wants to be president probably shouldn't be.
Yeah,
right?
Okay.
And I don't think that applies 100% to safety officers, but one of the things you said was that when that timer goes off, you have absolute power. in my opinion, and this is again my opinion, anyone who is attracted to that aspect of the job should not do it. I think that if you want to be a good safety officer, do it because you love the sport. Do it because you want to give back to your club.
Right.
Don't do it because you enjoy bossing people around. If
Right.
you're the kind of person who likes to do that, please stay away from the safety officer certification course. And because those are the kind of safety officers that do ruin people's matches, you know, and you'll see them in any sport. You know, we were talking about softball off camera a minute ago. I played baseball. I did competition martial arts for many, many years, and you will see referees in contact in fighting sports can absolutely influence the outcome of a match. They can absolutely decide who wins or loses that match, and they have a tremendous amount of power in that, especially in, you know, sports that are gambled on. So they have a fairly strict vetting process for contact sport referees. But, you know, with that, the same thing can be said of both range officers and safety officers. They have a tremendous amount of power over that shooter's eventual match outcome because they wield the power of the DQ. And I think that if you have that kind of personality that, you know, or maybe if you're just mad, you know, probably not the best thing.
Right.
But I will say that contrary to what you might read on the internet, guys like that are few and far between.
Yeah.
I've been shooting IDPA for since 2007 was my first IDPA match, and I can honestly say that I have only encountered one IDPA safety officer that was that kind of petty tyrant. And that guy, I mean, he was terrible, and he wasn't in this state, so it was none of our local guys, Rick. I know that was kicking around in your head, but it none of the guys up here. But one guy that I ran into, and I just remember thinking that I'm really glad that I am traveling to an out-of-state match and I don't have to shoot at this guy's club.
Yeah, and I think you know that's one of the other things about doing a little pre-screening.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is we have had interest expressed by people who the instructor group know, and we decide amongst ourselves we don't want this person to be a safety officer.
Right.
And you know, it's one of those things where some people just aren't suited to it, no matter how much they want to do it, you know. And then the flip side of that, of course, is that there's people who seem to be ideally suited to it by their temperament and their ability, and then they don't want to do it.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons is, and this is something that, again, it's just a personal decision you have to make, do you focus on your personal development as a shooter,
right?
And how is that affected by your range officer, safety officer status?
Well, and that's actually why the biggest reason why I stopped being a safety officer was that I wanted to get better as a shooter, and I wanted to perform better at sanctioned matches. And I figured out really quick that my match, so if I'm the safety officer at a match, you shoot it on SO day and all sorts of shenanigans. For whatever reason, SO day is always just rife with goofy shit happening. Or goofy stuff. Sorry, Mom. You know,
goofy poo-poo.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, you'll be shooting, you know, into like 10:30 at night using car headlights to illuminate stages, all kinds of goofy things. And my goal was to become a better shooter, which was initially why I got the safety officer certification, was because I wanted to have a thorough understanding of the rule book, which helps me as a shooter. And then I SO'd a couple of major matches, and I was like, this sucks. And I mean, for me, with my personality, it was terrible. I had an awful experience. So, and that's why I stopped, because I wasn't a good safety officer, and I would rather be a good shooter than a good safety officer. And that does make me a bit of an a-hole, but I'm okay with that.
You know, see, I've always used my status as a safety officer and a range officer as a vehicle. Well, no, for shooting matches that I couldn't afford to shoot.
Right.
I've traveled to a lot of matches where they'll waive the match fee, put you up in a hotel, you know, stuff like that if you work the match. And so I will attend a match for very little cost that I wouldn't have attended if I hadn't worked it. And so that's, for me, I've shot a lot more matches in my life outside of the local area because I've been able to work them as a Ranger safety officer.
Interesting side note to that. This just popped into my mind. At the NRA Bianchi Cup, which will have happened by the time you see this episode, but hasn't happened yet. We're doing this Top Gear style. The safety officers actually are not allowed to shoot the match.
Interesting.
They are all volunteer staff that are drawn from non-shooters. And B&K Cup's been in the same location for 30 years now, so they actually have staff that have done almost every match, and they're very experienced. They know how to get the well, I'm not an engineer. Pneumatic is air, right?
Yes, it is, as opposed to hydraulic, which is liquid.
Yeah, they know how to get the pneumatic turning targets all dialed in and everything.
Right.
But yeah, I found that out last year, and I was actually surprised, because like that was the whole reason I thought you were a safety officer, was to shoot matches for free.
Yeah.
Like isn't that why everyone gets the cert?
Yeah.
Apparently not.
But you're absolutely right that it does adversely affect your shooting performance.
Yeah.
I've been a range officer and a chief range officer at USPSA area championships. I've been safety officer at more than a few IDPA sanctioned matches, and sometimes I'll have a good match, but oftentimes it's too much work. I mean, it's like I was reading. I'm going to get a little bit of field here, but we'll come back around.
I'm with you.
I was reading a story about Alexander the Great's army.
Okay.
And how they had horses, and their job was to carry food for the other horses. And somebody said, well, why would you have an extra horse? Why doesn't the horse carry his own food?
Because it's a war horse.
He's a war horse. He can't be expected to be a beast of burden and also have the spirit of a fighting animal. And I just thought it's the same deal. I mean, you go to a match, you can't spend a week or even a couple of days setting up stages, tweaking, retweaking, sleeping in a strange bed, and then on match day shoot a good score.
Yeah.
I mean, it's very difficult.
I even find it difficult to be a squad safety officer at just a club match and still shoot a good match, because like we were talking about earlier, so much of your focus is on things that have nothing to do with your shooting.
Right.
So, you may be SOing a guy, and then all of a sudden, the scorekeeper's like, hey, Caleb, you're on deck. And you're like, oh, crap, I'm the next shooter.
I better do a little walkthrough.
Yeah. Can somebody take the timer for me? And then, did I load my mags? There's so much else going on that, for me, it makes it very difficult to focus on my shooting performance, my stage planning, and my execution. And
I've probably worked, if I look at all the matches I've shot in my life, I'm sure I had a timer in my hand 90% of the matches I've shot.
I couldn't do that.
And
so let's talk about we have the instructor packet as issued to I don't even recognize her, as issued to Team Beretta. There used to be one of those. I forgot about that.
Yeah, who was the Team Beretta guy?
That used to be Ernie
Langdon.
Yeah, Ernie Langdon used to be Team Beretta.
That'll be our trivia question for the next episode.
Well, no, he doesn't shoot for team. No, oh man, let's not even get into that. We're having some off-camera conversation here that we don't want to discuss. You can tell how dated this packet is because it's got Julie Golub on the front, back when she was shooting for Team Glock.
Right.
So it's a little bit more recent than when she was with the AMU, but still. So, and I think it's interesting that you guys have this really sexy packet, because I don't remember getting one of those when I took the SO course in Indiana. But
well, this is the instructor packet.
That's why.
And I'd show you what's inside, but then I'd have to kill you.
Oh, okay. I can't see that. But to kind of give us an overview, of what someone can expect when they go to the class. I know for me, there was a PowerPoint presentation, and then we went out and we did like a little bit of a skills evaluation.
For a number of years, there was not an official class curriculum.
No kidding.
It was the safety officer class that I took place in a conference room at an office in downtown Seattle.
I was so hoping for an airport hotel. 6
guys sitting around a conference room table and essentially covering the differences between USPSA and IDPA.
That's effective.
Yeah, and it lasted probably maybe 3 hours. Then we went to a Mariners game, and we're all safety officers now.
That was a great safety officer course. I want to take that one. If I ever have to get recertified, that's how we're doing it.
Yeah, and this is I don't have confirmation of this, but to give you an idea of what a small group the safety officer instructor corps was. This was in 2001. Our instructor told us that when he came up from California, he said, when I'm done with this class, I want 2 of you to be instructors and 1 of you to take over the job as area coordinator for Washington and Oregon. And so I was an instructor, And he told us we were the first 2 safety officers instructors who were not known by
knighted
Bill
instructor.
Wilson personally.
Wow.
And this was 5 years
What was
after.
that, 98?
This was 2001.
Oh, okay.
And so that just gives you an idea of how small the group was at that time.
It's still pretty small.
There were 6 of us here way up in the corner of Washington, and at that time, I don't know how many safety officers there were on the entire West Coast, instructors especially. But now we teach classes. We've probably got 30 or 40 certified safety officers. We teach a class in the Seattle area at least once a year. We've traveled to Oregon, Alaska,
Canada,
BC.
don't you know?
Yeah, and so, it's all in here, and now there is an official curriculum. There was an unofficial curriculum for a while, and we actually took it, printed it out, and made little notes on it, and just said, this isn't going to work, this isn't going to work. And so there was there was an element of consistency then, but now there's the official PowerPoint presentation that essentially goes through the rule book almost page by page.
It was very dry.
And it is, and it's a full day. I mean, you're sitting in a classroom we've gotten it down to about, with a lunch break, I think we get it done in less than 9 hours. But that's a long day, and that's just the classroom portion.
Yeah, that's not even the skills.
And then there's like a half day of range time where you're practicing and demonstrating the stuff that you've learned. And so it's just essentially going through the rule book, like I said, literally almost page by page, and just going into each rule, getting a little... one of the things about IDPA, because some of the rules are so subjective, is you have to explain why the rule is the way it is.
The spirit of the rule.
Exactly. And sometimes that's the harder part to get across, is you can look at the book and say, here's the penalty for doing this. But then, why are we penalizing them for doing it? Yeah,
exactly.
Why are we penalizing them for doing this? And then there'll be, we've actually broken the class down where 2 or 3 of us will teach the class, and that is 2 or 3 of the instructors will teach the class, and we each have kind of our area of expertise. Like I'm the equipment guy, and so when we get to the
everything's illegal. I mean,
when we get to the section on holsters and mag pouches and guns and safeties and all that stuff.
Speed holster and IDPA.
Yeah, no.
What about my Sierra Speed mag pouches?
Any other questions?
Sierra Speed mag pouches without the
spacers
screw.
or whatever. Yeah, I mean, there's all kinds of Jim Cracker you can put on there.
Jim Cracker.
That's one of the official. That's on page 23 of the instructor packet.
It is now 1952.
It is too. It's right there. So anyway, what you can expect is a 9 hours of action-packed instruction.
No one's ever going to get SO certified after they watch this. I've told them it's a terrible drudge and you'll shoot like crap. And now you just told them that they're going to sit in a classroom for 9 hours. What have we done?
Yeah, and so you have to have a working knowledge of the rule book going into it. Otherwise, you won't be familiar with it. But the range time is the part that's the most fun. We generally assign somebody, as we call them, the problem child. And their job is to come to the line and essentially mess with the new safety officer.
Oh, can I do that at your next class?
Well,
I will just come out to do that at your next class.
And the idea is to kind of compress all of the shenanigans that somebody is likely to see as a safety officer. And it'll be, it's not necessarily stuff that's... cheating, but it's
your
just...
mag pouches might be too far forward.
Exactly. And so I'll do stuff like, when I'm playing the problem child, I'll come to the line and I'm left-handed. And so the safety officer, of course, is standing dutifully over my right shoulder like he was told to. And so as I'm walking to the line, I push my holster up, and then I take the gun out and I'm manipulating it like this, fiddling around with it.
So he can't see what's going on.
Yeah, so he can't see, and sometimes they'll come running around, to the other side. And other times I realize that they're not, they just haven't got in them yet to forcefully insist that I show me the gun kind of a thing, And
when I say unload and show clear, I actually want to see clear.
Exactly.
Don't just, pop it out, catch your lab around like a ninja, and then drop the hammer.
Right. And so it's just, there's a lot of, even if you know the rules, you've got to be able to demonstrate your ability to enforce them. And, and be patient, too. You've got the person who comes to the line. We had a guy in our IPSC 101 class. We thought he had a disability. He was shaking. He was literally like this, and it turns out he just said, no, I'm just so nervous I can't stand still, kind of a thing.
That's really nervous.
Yeah, and people are that way, and it affects them different ways. And so you have to kind of as a safety officer, not just know the rules and enforce the rules, but you also have to have a sense of pace, that suits the person. Some of them come to the line and they're ahead of you on the instruction, like the unload and show clear. They've already got the gun in their holster before you can say clear, and or they're looking for the round on the ground, or kind of stuff. And so you kind of have to adapt your approach to a little bit to each shooter. And sometimes, you don't want to chit chat with them. That's the other thing. But you've got to take a little time just to kind of evaluate their demeanor and and whatnot. And so not to make it sound like you have to be some kind of a social worker, but you do have to have a certain ability to kind of evaluate somebody's mood.
Skills.
Yeah, exactly. So it's not all just memorizing rules and whatnot. You do have to be a little bit of a people person.
Great safety officer story. One of the funniest DQs I've ever seen. We had a guy at a club match, and he load and make ready, so he loads and makes ready, and he was wearing a watch, not like this Smith & Wesson M&P watch. Smith & Wesson, we love you. But
did they give that to you?
Yeah. But
where's mine? Smith & Wesson M&P watch.
You want this one?
No, I've got a watch.
But one. Actually, that's a good example. So he had a watch like that where it has the clasp on the back and not the well, that's a nice watch. We just had a watch fly.
Oh, it fits around Steve's dainty wrist.
So anyway, here, let me see that for a second before you wreck it.
No.
Show him the clasp.
That's a manly clasp.
All right, so it had a clasp like that. And what happened was,
Steve.
when he went to... that's your gun hand, man. Be careful.
Okay.
When he went to load and make ready, his clasp popped off. So his watch was hanging there, kind of loose like they do. So here was... and I wasn't the safety officer, but my reaction would have been the same. Here's what he did, was he went and he took his loaded gun and pointed it up at the ceiling, grabbed it by the barrel, and then went and started effing with his watch like this. And the safety officer who was standing there, it took him a good, it felt like a long time. It was probably pretty quick, but I remember watching him just standing there going, stop! Because there's that pause where you don't, and you'll see stuff like that. I will say, one of the fun things about being a safety officer is you get to see people do things with guns in their hands that you're just like, no!
Right.
Why would you do that?
One of my favorites is the person that comes to the line with all their mags on the same side of their body as their gun hand.
Right.
So they draw the gun out, and then you can see the gears turning. Like, how am I going to get the mag?
Right.
And so they go like this.
Yep. Oh, I've never seen that. That's
my favorite. That was my favorite.
That's good.
But I see them. They'll take the gun. They'll grab it they'll grab the slide or the barrel like this. Or they'll turn it upside down, like, why
not just go like that?
Well, why didn't they put it on the left side where the free hand is? And so that's one of my, as a safety officer, that's one of my things that for a new shooter is put your ammo on the weak hand side. So anyway, I don't want to get too bogged down. We can do an entire episode on fun experiences like that at matches. But again, if you're inclined to become a safety officer, the first thing you can do is, I think, express an interest to the people who run in your local club.
Let your club bosses know.
Yeah, and then if you can, handle the timer. You don't have to be certified to handle the timer. So pal around with one of the safety officers that let him let you handle the timer occasionally. Become familiar with it. That's one of the ways that you can tell if somebody's, suitable to do it, is see him in action. We have so many that's one of the things about having so many certified safety officers at our club is if you're not a safety officer, you don't have much opportunity to run the timer.
Right.
Because we've got safety officers holding the clipboard, safety officers holding the timer.
I've been on squads with like 4 safety officers, and they're like, hey, Caleb, are you a safety officer? Yeah, but what's the point?
Yeah.
There's 4 of you already.
Yeah.
I think, for me, the bottom line is if you really want, and I say that all the time, the bottom line.
The bottom line. We're very bottom line.
We are.
Yeah. We're all about the bottom line.
Not really.
Yeah.
If you really want to give back to the sport and you want to do something that supports the club and supports the growth at your club and bringing shooters in, becoming a safety officer is a great way to do that.
Yep.
I would caution you that because it's a very thankless job because you'll get
it can be
because you'll get guys whiny gamers who will bitch at you. You'll get whiny gamers. I'm pointing at myself who will bitch at you about cover calls and whatever it is, and and I don't do that nearly as much as I did before. It was funny, before I became a safety officer, I would complain about things. After I became a safety officer, unless you are like actively screwing me over, then I'm like, whatever. It's just a game.
Right.
But if you really want to give back to the sport, becoming a safety officer is a great way to do it. And I feel like being a safety officer is a tough job, and there are so many really great safety officers in IDPA. I've been to sanctioned matches all over the country, and I've encountered fantastic safety officers everywhere I've went. And like I said, out of all of those sanctioned matches in like 10 different states, I've had one bad experience. So that speaks very highly of the type of person that becomes an IDPA safety officer. And I have been generally impressed with the guys I've had the chance to interact with.
Yeah, and as an instructor, I've taught maybe as many all over the country. I mean, western part of the U.S. and Canada, at least 50 different safety officers, and I've generally always been impressed with their desire. I mean, that's the thing, is they do want to get back to the sport. They're not jerks. They're not, looking for a power trip or whatever. And so, I think you do find quality people who are putting themselves in that position to receive the training and become those. And they're representatives for the sport, too. I mean,
they are.
When you go to a match, that's your interface with IDPA as those safety officers.
As a safety officer in IDPA, you are absolutely the ambassador for that sport to new shooters and to experienced shooters. And also on top of that, you're the ambassador for your club. Yep. If I go to, I went to the IDPA World Championship last year, and one safety officer on stage, one or two, instead of unload and show clear, he would say unload, show clear, shoot the berm. And I thought it was funny.
Shoot the berm.
And I was like,
okay.
Click. And I put my gun back in the holster, and I chuckled a little bit. He was a really nice guy, just a great guy. He told me what club he was from, and because of that, interaction, if I was ever down there for work and I had a chance, I'd go shoot their match.
Right.
So you're an ambassador for the sport, you're an ambassador for the club. So if you want to do this, whenever you're actually out there running the timer, bear that in mind, because just like a referee, people don't see shooters. They don't see a safety officer as a person. By and large, we see you as the guy holding the timer who's handing out penalties.
Yep.
And, remember that, keep that in mind, and you will do a lot better as a safety officer as well.
Yep. So
you're a person to me, Rick.
I know. I'm not just a faceless safety officer.
No, you're not a timer stand.
No, thank you. Well, when I'm shooting USPSA, I am. So Steve set this one out, but we're going to do a future episode on USPSA range officers, and so Steve will get a chance to talk about that. But if you have any questions about safety officer training, give us a little jingle at powerfactorshow@gmail.com.
Or go to the website at powerfactorshow.com. And again, if you guys would like to support the show with a donation, that's set up on the site. And you can also check us out on Facebook. I'll take this bullet for you, Steve. Rick. You can also check us out on Facebook at facebook.com/powerfactorshow. Thanks, everyone, for watching.
See ya.